Shalom from Israel to all of the Daystar viewers around the world. I'm Moshe Bar Tzvi, the producer and founder of Israel Now News. We at Israel Now News are dedicated to bringing you the full story and the truth about Israel from Israel. It's written in the Holy Bible when David said in Psalm 25:5, "Lead me in your truth and teach me, for you are the God of my salvation. For you I wait all the day long." And God says in Zechariah 8:16, "These are the things that you shall do. Speak out the truth to one another. Judge with truth and judgment to peace in your gates. And always search for the truth, and the truth shall set you free." John 8:31. I hope you enjoyed the program. God bless you from Jerusalem. Shalom, shalom.
Welcome to Israel Now News. I'm Yochanan Elrom.
And I'm Erin Viner.
In our top story, former Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon has passed away. Dignitaries from all over the world came to Jerusalem to pay tribute to Israel's former Prime Minister Ariel Sharon. He was remembered as a brave general who fought for the independence of the State of Israel, as well as in several other Israeli conflicts. His military legacy helped to form the IDF's philosophy of the commanding officer leading the troops into combat. Sharon also served the state in the political realm. He was the 11th Prime Minister of Israel when he suffered a brain aneurysm, which left him in a coma for the last 8 years. Thousands of mourners paid tribute to Sharon as his body lay in state at the Israeli Knesset. He was laid to rest next to his late wife, Lily, near their ranch in the Negev desert.
The news of Sharon's death was celebrated in the Gaza Strip and in Palestinian cities. A spokesperson for the Hamas terrorist organization released a statement that their people felt extreme happiness over the death and departure of Ariel Sharon. A senior member of Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas' Fatah party also released a statement criticizing the former Israeli leader. In scenes reminiscent of the 9/11 terror attacks on the United States, Palestinians in Gaza celebrated in the streets by handing out candy and firing guns in the air. Just hours after the announcement of Sharon's passing, rockets were fired from Gaza toward southern Israel. 2 more missiles were fired into Israel shortly after the conclusion of Sharon's funeral.
Iran will start to reap the benefits of sanctions relief at the beginning of February. Although the hardline Islamic Republic has made no concrete concessions on its rogue nuclear program, which it vows to use to wipe Israel off the map, the P5+1 nations, Britain, France, China, Russia, the United States, and Germany, have agreed to ease sanctions to the tune of $4.2 billion. On February 1st, Iran will receive $550 million in the first installment of blocked overseas funds. President Barack Obama described the $4.2 billion total as modest sanctions relief, and he renewed his threat to veto any further attempts by the American Congress to ratchet up sanctions against Iran. Israel fears that the interim nuclear deal does not deter Tehran from developing a nuclear weapon, and that the funds will provide a much-needed financial shot in the arm for the ailing Iranian economy.
Palestinian President Abbas has released a defiant statement that could mark the beginning of the end of the peace process, stating that the Palestinians will never recognize nor accept Israel as the Jewish state. Abbas also stated that Jerusalem will be the capital of the future Palestinian state and that he is considering other options than continuing the U.S.-brokered negotiations. Abbas then proclaimed that Palestinians will march to Jerusalem in the millions, even welcoming martyrdom if it happens. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that Abbas' hardline speech is proof that he is not prepared to negotiate with Israel.
Hamas held a massive military parade in the Gaza Strip last week, celebrating what they called Israel's imminent demise. The Hamas terrorist organization took control of the Gaza Strip following a bloody coup in 2007. They rule by terrorism, and the civilians in the densely populated area live in fear and poverty. There's poor sanitation in Gaza, and clean drinking water is scarce. Hamas, which uses public funds to finance its war on Israel, announced during a parade last week that Israel will soon be destroyed. Fahi Hamad, a prominent leader of Hamas, told the crowd, "We are coming after the Zionists with all our leaders and soldiers." He issued a threat to Israel saying, "You have only 8 years on the land before your demise." We are still on the threshold of an Islamic march, and we will enter the Al-Aqsa Mosque as liberators.
The international watchdog organization Open Doors is working with persecuted Christians around the world and just published a report stating that the number of Christians killed for their faith nearly doubled in 2013. The document cited the number of deaths during 2012 of Christians who died because of their beliefs as 1,201, while in 2013, 2,123 Christians were martyred. North Korea was listed as the most dangerous country for Christians, followed by Somalia. According to the report, radical Muslim leadership has made Somalia very dangerous for Christians, and that a Christian cannot trust anyone in the sub-Saharan country because one false confidence could cause the loss of one's head. Open Doors listed Syria as the third most dangerous place for Christians, reporting that many ancient Christian communities in the Arab Republic have simply vanished, and that more than half of the Christians killed in 2013 were murdered in Syria.
Syria has become a major hub for narcotics trafficking. According to Syrian activists and drug experts, the production of amphetamines in Syria is helping the opposition to fund the civil war against President Bashar al-Assad. Rebel fighters are reportedly using the drugs to fight longer without the need for sleep or food. The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime reported that the type of stimulants being produced are used throughout the Arab Middle East. Syria's production of the narcotic in 2013 surpassed the surrounding countries. Experts speculate that the increase in production and sales of amphetamines is generating hundreds of millions of dollars for Syrian rebel fighters, who likely use their profits to fund the civil war, which has raged on now for nearly 3 years. Recent figures estimate that up to 130,000 people have been killed in the fighting, including 11,000 children.
Egyptian citizens returned to the polls for the sixth time since the ousting of former autocratic ruler Hosni Mubarak in 2011, and for the first time since the toppling of former Islamist President Mohamed Morsi, to vote in a constitutional referendum. 160,000 Egyptian soldiers and 200,000 police officers safeguarded the polling stations throughout the country. Egypt remains on high alert for fear of backlash from the Muslim Brotherhood, which has been branded a terrorist organization. Approval of the new charter is the first step in transferring the country from military to democratic rule.
At least 50 Palestinians were injured when protest against an UNRWA workers' strike became violent. Employees of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency have been on strike for over a month, demanding higher wages. The labor dispute has brought sanitation and other services to a halt. At least 40 Palestinian police officers were injured last week when protesters pelted them with rocks. UNRWA is a special agency created by the United Nations which deals exclusively with Palestinian refugees. It employs over 5,000 Palestinians, which are paid about 80% more than their counterparts in the public sector. The walkout has resulted in the closure of schools, clinics, and sanitation services in the refugee camps, and the residents say the conditions are intolerable. This comes as reports have surfaced of more than 40 deaths at the Palestinian refugee camp in Syria. Aaron Viner has more on that story.
Yes, Yochanan. Sources in Syria and within the Palestinian Authority are reporting that the Yarmouk refugee camp in Syria has been virtually destroyed. Regime troops have prevented the delivery of food and medical supplies since July in response to the rebels' seizure of the camp in December of 2012. The majority of the 250,000 residents fled, and the remaining 18,000 inhabitants are said to be starving. At least 43 people have died of starvation over the past 6 weeks, and a camp worker told reporters that at least 10 others are dying and there's nothing that can be done to help them. Palestinian residents of Ramallah staged a sit-in protest at the PLO headquarters for what they say is inaction on the part of the Palestinian leadership, and without providing further details, a Fatah official announced that the siege will be lifted on Monday.
The Israeli Knesset celebrated its 65th anniversary last week by holding an open house. Yuli Edelstein, the Speaker of the Knesset, said, "We opened our doors to the public so that they can get to know their representatives up close and to remind them that the Knesset is the house of the people and belongs to every citizen." Festivities included Knesset tours, actors portraying Israel's founding fathers, And Minister of Interior Gideon Sa'ar hosted story time in the Knesset for a kindergarten class.
Jews throughout the world observe the holiday of Tu B'Shvat this week in celebration of God's blessings of agriculture. The date is known as the New Year for trees, and in Israel it is traditional to plant a tree on Tu B'Shvat. Jewish communities mark the occasion with festive meals, highlighting the seasonal fruits, nuts, and vegetables, while reciting special prayers for the bounty provided by God. We here at Israel Now News would like to wish all of our viewers a plentiful year, and we pray that God will provide for all your needs.
Those who dreamed about the Jewish state, those who wrought the historical miracle and against all odds established a state, those who arrived in the homeland to their new home, those who propelled Israel forward step after step.
I have no doubt that this expanded partnership with our many Christian supporters will greatly strengthen Israel in the years ahead. And I want to thank you all for being part of that historic effort and that historic partnership. May God bless all of Israel's friends throughout the world. May God bless you.
And that concludes the news portion of our show. Stay tuned for Ask the Source with Josh Reinstein.
Hello and welcome to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein, and we're here in a beautiful day in Jerusalem on our rooftop studio. My guest today is Chris Mitchell, author of Dateline Jerusalem. Chris, thank you for being on the show.
Josh, great to be with you.
Chris, tell our viewers a little about what is Dateline Jerusalem?
Dateline Jerusalem is a book about what's the unfolding prophecies here happening in the Middle East. I came here 13 years ago as the bureau chief for CBN News, and over that time we've been able to chronicle many of the unfolding prophecies that are happening. I'll give you one example. One example is back in several years ago, we went to Odessa in the Ukraine, and we took a voyage that was 3 days from Odessa all the way back to Haifa with Russian Olim, men and women who were becoming Aliyah. They were making their pilgrimage sort of back to the Jewish homeland. And 150 years ago, Aliyah started in such a dramatic way. And we're sitting right now behind a miracle. I mean, if you look at Israel right now, they just had over 8 million citizens, and most of them are Jews who have come back from the four corners of the world. And this is just one of the unfolding prophecies that we talk about in Dateline Jerusalem.
You know, it's interesting because you live here in Israel, and people who live in Israel see actually biblical prophecy happening every day. The ingathering of the Jewish people, like you mentioned, the deserts blooming, children playing in the streets of Jerusalem. Why do you think the international media just doesn't mention any of these things?
Well, one of the chapters we have in the book is the Israel you never knew, and it shows about the Israel that you had mentioned, children playing in the streets of Jerusalem, fulfilling Zechariah 4, chapter 4, verse 8, the desert blooming. And what the mainstream media many times shows is the conflict, this issue between the Israelis and Palestinians. But if you come here, there's much more that's going on besides that. They get a distorted picture of the conflict happening in the picture of Jerusalem or Israel. And when you come here for the first time, you see in Israel you never really find out about. There's amazing startup companies happening in Israel that are affecting the world, agriculture, technology, medical breakthroughs, and these things are happening here in Israel and really changing the world. And Israel is becoming not the pariah of the nations, as the mainstream media would have many people believe, but a light to the nations.
One of the things that I've seen is that for Jews and Christians, Israel is the most exciting thing to happen in our faith in the last 2,000 years.
That's right.
Yet time and time again, people focus on biblical Israel and not the modern miracle state of Israel. Why is that?
People need to know both. They need to know what's happening in 1948. That was a fulfillment of prophecy when the modern state of Israel was born. 1967, when the city that's behind us was reunited for the first time in 2,000 years. And so those are exciting things. And they also need to know what's happening today in Israel and those unfolding prophecies.
We see a lot of mainstream forces standing against Israel. Even on the university campuses, we see a liberal agenda that's become anti-Israel, even though we're the only free and democratic state in the Middle East with rights for all our citizens. Do you think this has to do with religion, or do you think this is just a miscommunication?
I think it's a spiritual battle. I mean, if you take it at its root, in the things that are happening around Israel right now, it's getting pressure from all sides. That's another thing we talk about in the book. Not only Iran and its nuclear program, Syria and the rebels that want to make Jerusalem the capital of an Islamic caliphate, this Islamic empire, but also, as you mentioned, on the college campuses, what's called sometimes the BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, which is trying to delegitimize the state of Israel. And you really need to come here to see what Israel really is, as opposed to the kind of skewed picture that other people want to paint Israel.
I think one of the most important aspects of the book is that you actually debunk the myth that this conflict here has something to do with land or territory, but really it's a religious conflict. Why do you feel that this is a religious conflict?
Well, because they say it is. And if there's a chapter called Palestine, Fact or Fiction, and many people have a superficial understanding of what's going on, but if you listen and read what the Palestinian Authority is saying, many times they say specifically this is a religious conflict. It's not just a conflict about land, but it's an ideology, an Islamic theology that they want to eliminate the state of Israel, destroy the Jewish people. And so that's sort of underlying what's going on. You'd look at the peace process, but you really need to look underneath these meetings and what's happening back and forth diplomatically to understand the real reason, the motivation behind what's happening.
Chris, there are literally tens of millions of people watching this show. What message do you have for our viewing audience?
Well, Josh, I think there would be three things. The first thing, I think you need to be educated and understand. And obviously, if you're watching Israel Now News, you want to understand what's happening in Israel. That's the motivation as well behind Dateline Jerusalem. I think the other thing that needs to happen is you need to stand with the state of Israel. There's a promise in Genesis 12, 2 and 3 that says, He will bless those that bless Israel, curse those who curse Israel. And you need to understand the true Israel, and you'll be blessed. And finally, I think you need to pray. In Psalm 122:6, it says, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. They shall prosper who love thee. And it comes with a promise. So I would say be educated, be informed, also stand with the state of Israel, and also pray for the peace of Jerusalem.
Thank you, Chris, for being on the show. And thank you for tuning in to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein. Now back to the studio.
This is Jerusalem, Israel's capital city. It's an ancient and modern treasure that is beyond belief. There's a little bit of Israel in all of us. Come find the Israel in you.
Up next, Shining Light from Israel.
Many of us take simple tasks like crossing the street by a traffic light, reading a newspaper article, or choosing our favorite product off the shopping mall shelf for granted. Today, there are approximately 300 million visually impaired people around the globe, for whom these tasks are often challenging, sometimes impossible. Orcam, a new product invented in Israel, promises to dramatically enhance and improve the daily lives of the visually impaired. User Liat Negrin affirms that the device most definitely lives up to its promise.
I was born with a rare condition called coloboma, which is, in general, it's lack of cells in the retina. It's a challenge for me to go to new places. When I walk, I can see the street sign, but I can't read it. And now I can. I don't need to wait until I find someone that I feel comfortable asking where I am. I have the Orcam, and I just point, and it will tell me in 2 seconds what it is.
With the simple point of a finger, the Orcam, a small wearable camera which understands what it sees, delivers the information to the wearer through a discrete bone conduction earphone.
If I hold a newspaper, I can't see the small font in the article. So with Orcam, I can just point at it, at the column, it will read it to me.
Brazil coach Luis Felipe Scolari hopes to lead his team to victory at the 2014 World Cup.
In 2010, Professor Amnon Shashua, a specialist in computer vision at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, realized that there was finally both the hardware and the software to start working towards a system that can have almost vision-like capabilities. And the OrCam was born.
What OrCam can do now is it can read any printed text in English. It can recognize thousands of objects, including buses, traffic lights, bills, and it does all that with merely the point of a finger.
Liran Frank was born with 20/20 vision, but as a young child, he was told by doctors that at some unknown point in his life, he would go blind.
8 years ago, a dormant condition that I had since birth activated itself and made me lose 95% of my eyesight. So 95% of the day I am totally blind, and that's also why I walk with a cane. I feel that the OrCam enhances daily life. It's like a cane helper. When I walk on the street, the cane helps me not to bump into things, and the OrCam helps me to orient myself.
The OrCam is discreet, portable, and user-friendly. One can also personalize the device, teaching it to recognize objects from everyday life, such as shopping products and credit cards.
Please wave product. Thank you. Please name the product after the beep.
Visa.
OrCam recently launched successfully in the United States, and by year's end will launch in most English-speaking countries around the globe.
I think that OrCam is a magnificent idea, and it can enhance the daily life of people who are blind and visually impaired to be able to see.
I feel more independent when I use OrCam. It's very intuitive. It makes my life easier.
This is Ayelet Saban for Israel Up Close.
Anywhere else, this would be a vacation by a lake. But this is the Sea of Galilee. The wonders of Israel are beyond belief. There's a little bit of Israel in all of us. Come find the Israel in you.
Please stay tuned for the ICEJ report from the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem.
Welcome to the ICJ report. My name is Juha Ketala and I'm the International Director of our ministry. The Lord has called us both to Israel and to the nations. That's why we have our headquarters here in Jerusalem. You can see our building here behind me. And in the nations, we have our national branches. Now we as a ministry, we are like a funnel, like a pipe with a wide opening to channel the support and help from the nations into the lives of the individual citizens in Israel. We have had our physical presence here in Jerusalem since 1980. In our headquarters here in Jerusalem, we have a staff of about 40 people from more than 12 different nations. And from here, we are spreading out to all Israel. And the Lord has enabled us to touch the different layers of the Israeli society. We have been doing it, and we are doing it either by our ICEJ aid social assistance programs and projects that are going to the north and south and east and west of Israel, or we are doing the touching of the layers of the Israeli society by our partnerships with many different various institutes here in Israel. Among them, for example, the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus, enabling us to touch the national leadership of Israeli nation, the modern day Israel. Or we have a partnership with the Yad Vashem, the most prestigious, very well-known institute in Israel the Holocaust Museum and the Educational Center. Now, this is what we are doing in Israel. Now, in the nations then, and this is vitally important, very, very important. In the nations, we are serving the body of Christ. Our message nourishes, it builds trust in the spirit of the believers. When we show from the Bible and from the history how God has been so faithful to the Israelites and the modern day Israelis. The Israelis are back in the modern day state of Israel here in the land. God is forever faithful. So we are serving the local body of Christ with our message. But we are doing more than that. We are raising a global prayer on behalf of Israel in the nations. And we are also raising some other kind of support in the nations. And we do this by reaching out to the national leaders and the decision makers in the countries. We are speaking on behalf of Israel and raising understanding of the Israelis and what kind of situations they have in the land. You need to be part of this. Within the last year alone, we were in more than 30 nations, almost 30 nations, from Israel, from Jerusalem. And this is in addition to what the national branches have been doing in more than 70 nations. We have been establishing new branches within the last year. In November last year, we had a new branch we established in Sierra Leone. Then in February in Senegal and in Niger. And then in May in Slovenia. So we have new branches. We have a vision to reach out to the Muslim countries. The Lord prophesied over us that we will establish 10 new branches in the Muslim countries. China is opening for us. Spanish-speaking world is opening for us. In Africa alone, we have more than 20 nations to go into. You need to get involved. Do something practical. Click the donation button on our website and learn where you can put your monies in to support the ministry. Actions prevail over mere knowledge. Write a check. Pray for us. Remember, we are your embassy here in Jerusalem.
That's all for this edition of Israel Now News. I'm Yochanan Ilrom.
And I'm Erin Viner, reporting from our studio in Jerusalem. Please join us again next week for all your Israel updates.